The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom, a tragic end of two college students. Have you ever heard the saying that hesitation is akin to death? In our story today, this takes on a literal meaning as the negligent delay by police officers cost the lives of two young people. During the subsequent legal proceedings, it was repeatedly stated that the officers followed protocol and waited 24 hours from the time of the missing persons report. However, it was during these critical hours that the couple endured a tragic end under extreme cruelty. The case of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom is cited as one of the most notorious and brutal in the history of the United States. It shook the nation twice, first in 2007 when the crimes occurred, and later in 2011 when the sentences handed down to the gang members were challenged and appealed. This complicated legal battle led to the enactment of two laws. These laws restrict attorneys and defendants from casting the victims in a negative light and abolish the requirement for a jury's unanimous verdict to be approved by a judge. In this harrowing tale, there were two innocent victims and 5 merciless criminals, with the motive for the heinous act being a simple robbery. Let's delve into the details of this tragedy. Piece together the chronology of those horrific events. Understand the role of each participant, and explore whether this tragedy could have been avoided and the young lives saved. Who were Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom? Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., commonly known as Chris, was born on September 21, 1983 in Knoxville, Tennessee to Mary and Hugh Newsom in a loving, large family. As the youngest child, he was adored by his family. Chris was athletic in his youth, particularly excelling in baseball during his school years. His coach believed he had a bright future in the sport, but a severe injury and a prolonged recovery process ended his promising athletic career. Nevertheless, Chris was a man of many talents. He was an excellent artist, played guitar, had woodworking skills, and was knowledgeable about cars and motorcycles. Dreaming of becoming a mechanic in his youth, Chris's passion for carpentry eventually took precedence. After high school, he attended the prestigious University of Tennessee, where he was a diligent student and ranked among the top of his class. Shannon Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in Nacogdoches, Texas, the younger of 2 children to Dina and Gary Christian. She was raised alongside her older brother, Chase, with whom she shared a close and affectionate bond. Notably, Dina had been diagnosed with infertility in her youth, and the birth of her 2 children was considered nothing short of a miracle. In 1997, the Christian family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where the children attended local schools, and the parents established a small but profitable family business. Dina conducted individual psychotherapy sessions at home. Shannon, sharing her mother's interest in psychology, was outgoing and kind-hearted. After high school, she pursued a degree in sociology at the University of Tennessee and worked part-time to save for her dream of buying a car. Her parents and brother helped her realize this dream on her 21st birthday, contributing towards the purchase of a silver Toyota 4Runner. It was on the university campus in 2006 that Christopher and Shannon met through mutual friends. She was just 21, and he was about to turn 23. It was love at first sight, and the couple became inseparable. Within a month, Chris introduced Shannon to his parents, expressing his desire to spend his future with her. Shannon reciprocated by introducing Chris to her family, who warmly welcomed him. In October 2006, a significant family dinner was held, attended by both their parents and siblings. Discussions revolved around the young couple's deep feelings and their plans to marry after graduating from university. Everyone was happy and full of hope for the future, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that would soon befall their families. Vanished on the way to a party, on January 6, 2007, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom were invited to a birthday party of a mutual friend. That Saturday, Shannon visited a beauty salon to prepare for the celebration, parking her car in a nearby underground garage where they planned to meet. However, Chris was delayed, leading to a slight argument between them as they were running late for the event. Their friends became increasingly worried when Shannon and Chris did not show up at the party. Known for their responsibility, it was unlike them to miss an event without notifying anyone. Attempts to reach them on their phones were unsuccessful. In desperation, Shannon's best friend repeatedly called her mother late into the night to check if everything was all right, but received no answer. The next morning, Dina, Shannon's mother, realized that her daughter had not come home. Initially, she was not overly concerned, assuming Shannon might have stayed over at Chris's place after the party. Besides, Shannon had a work shift on Sunday, so it was plausible she went straight to work from Chris's place. However, Dina's concern grew when she noticed several missed calls from an unknown number around midnight. Returning the call, she heard Shannon's friend's voice, informing her that Shannon and Chris had not shown up at the birthday party and were unreachable. This instilled fear in Dina, sensing that something terrible might have happened to her daughter and her boyfriend. Neither Shannon nor Chris was answering their phones, and Chris's parents were equally surprised, believing he was staying at Shannon's place. Further anxiety arose when it was discovered Shannon had not shown up for work either. The worried parents immediately contacted the police, but the response was lackluster. The officer suggested the couple might have simply sought some alone time and lost track of it. They also followed the protocol that an adult is considered missing only after 24 hours without contact. But for Shannon and Chris, those 24 hours were critical. Not willing to wait, the parents and friends of the young couple began their own search. They contacted everyone they knew, visited hospitals, distributed flyers with their photos, and set up social media groups appealing for any information about the missing students. Despite their efforts, no useful information surfaced. The last known sighting of Shannon was at the beauty salon she visited on Saturday. According to the hairstylist who attended her, Shannon only talked about the upcoming party and had no plans to stop anywhere else on the way. A gruesome discovery along the railroad tracks. It wasn't until Monday, January 8th, that the police finally began their search for the missing young couple, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom. By this time, thanks to the efforts of their parents and friends, almost the entire city was aware of their disappearance. The day before, on Sunday, there were rumors about a horrifying discovery near the railroad tracks, but no concrete information was available. A railroad worker inspecting the tracks in his assigned area stumbled upon what appeared to be severely damaged human remains on the embankment alongside the tracks. The body was in a horrific state with multiple injuries and had been doused with a flammable liquid in an attempt to burn it. The police responding to the scene cordoned off the area and conducted a thorough examination. However, they were unable to find any significant clues or leads. After taking necessary photographs, the remains were sent to the morgue for an autopsy to determine the cause of death and to attempt identification, though it was clear that the extensive damage and effects of the fire would make this difficult. Forensic experts determined that the body belonged to a young man who had suffered a brutal death. The victim had multiple injuries inflicted while he was alive, indicating prolonged and severe assault. Almost all of his teeth had been knocked out or damaged by blows. He had been shot 3 times, twice in the back, and a final fatal shot to the head. Additionally, traces of seminal fluid from at least 3 different men were found in his body, along with distinctive tears, suggesting repeated violent assaults. When police checked recent reports of missing young men, Christopher Newsom fit the description in age, height, and build. The officers contacted his parents and requested DNA samples for confirmation, but strongly advised against personal identification at the morgue, as the burnt remains barely resembled human features. Unfortunately, the DNA analysis confirmed that the body belonged to the missing student, Newsom. The search for Shannon. Despite the distressing news about Christopher, Shannon Christian's parents still clung to the hope that their daughter was alive, possibly being held somewhere. Her mobile phone was last pinged on the day the couple disappeared in one of Knoxville's more troubled neighborhoods, a place they wouldn't have visited by choice. This indicated that they were likely brought there against their will, and Shannon might still be held in the area. In a secluded alley of this neighborhood, Shannon's Toyota 4Runner was found abandoned. It was in a terrible state, so much so that Dina and Gary Christian hardly recognized their daughter's car. The SUV was dirty, scratched, with broken headlights and deflated tires. All of Shannon's personal belongings were missing from the car, which was littered with cigarette butts, and the seats were torn and stained. The driver's seat was pushed far back, suggesting that a large adult male had been the last one to drive it. A crumpled envelope with the address 2316 Chipman Street was found on the floor between the seats, likely dropped by the perpetrator. A local witness reported seeing 4 African-American males driving the SUV that Saturday evening, a vehicle that stood out in that area. Fingerprints on the envelope led the police to Lamarcus Davidson, previously convicted for serious offenses. His residence, located in an industrial area near a wasteland, lacked witnesses. When no one responded to the police's knock and offered to surrender, they forced entry, hoping to find Shannon alive inside. Inside the house, they found Shannon's purse, a stuffed toy from her car, as well as Christopher's headphones and baseball cap, a knife with blood traces, torn and blood-stained fragments of women's clothing, and Shannon's lifeless body were discovered in the house's trash chute system, hidden under dirty sheets. She was bound in the fetal position and wrapped in 5 trash bags. Experts later concluded that she likely passed away in the early hours of Monday, January 8th. This tragic finding suggested that if the police had begun their search immediately after the missing persons report, rather than waiting for 24 hours, Shannon might have been saved. A horrific state of suffering. The condition of Shannon Christian's body was a horrifying sight even for seasoned forensic experts, as there was not a single untouched area on her. Shannon was covered from head to toe with bruises, abrasions, cuts, and cigarette burns. The numerous tears and injuries to her genital area, as well as her oral cavity and throat, indicated that she had been subjected to multiple assaults by several men. Shannon sustained a serious head injury and internal bleeding in the abdominal area, likely resulting from being kicked. Furthermore, the merciless assailants inflicted several penetrating, though not fatal, stab wounds on her and extinguished dozens of cigarettes on her skin. In a brutal attempt to destroy DNA evidence on her body, the perpetrators doused her with household bleach, paying particular attention to bleeding wounds and her genital area. She was also forcibly made to ingest bleach. After these torturous acts, Shannon, still alive, was wrapped in 5 trash bags and then shoved into a household trash chute covered with sheets and rags. She slowly suffocated and bled to death, helplessly trapped with no chance of escape or calling for help. 5 merciless perpetrators. Lamarcus Davidson, in whose house the mutilated body of Shannon Christian and personal belongings of the deceased Christopher Newsom were found, was immediately declared a fugitive. The police also tracked down another suspect, Eric Boyd, whose traces were found at the crime scene. Boyd was apprehended on January 11th without resistance and agreed to cooperate with the investigation, claiming he wouldn't go to prison for crimes he didn't commit. Boyd revealed that Davidson was hiding in a vacant house listed for sale and personally led the police to the location. Davidson, unprepared for this turn of events, was caught off guard and offered no resistance. Notably, at the time of his arrest, Davidson was wearing sneakers that had belonged to the deceased student. During interrogations, Davidson tried to minimize his role, portraying himself as a victim. He claimed that the couple had come to his house looking to buy banned substances, but were caught up in a conflict with his acquaintances. Davidson insisted that he left to avoid involvement, and the subsequent brutal acts occurred in his absence. Further interrogations revealed 3 more individuals involved in the case: Davidson's friend George Thomas, his half-brother Latalvis Cobbins, and an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa Lynn Coleman. Once all 5 suspects were in custody, they were placed in separate cells and interrogated individually. Each tried to deflect blame onto the others, inadvertently revealing details of the heinous crime. Their fragmented accounts helped piece together the event's chronology and each perpetrator's role in the brutal act. A timeline of tragic events. Lamarcus Davidson, who had been released from prison on parole just a few months before these events, was desperately in need of money. He was involved in the sale of banned substances and urgently required a vehicle to deliver these to his customers. Davidson decided to steal a car from an underground parking lot, known for its lack of surveillance cameras, and headed there with his accomplices. Tragically, at that moment, students Shannon and Christopher were in the parking lot, arguing over Chris's delay. The criminals, deciding to leave no witnesses, forced the couple into the trunk of a car at gunpoint. The pair was taken to Davidson's house, where they were brutally beaten and repeatedly assaulted. After midnight, A barefoot and undressed Christopher was again forced into the trunk and taken to the railroad tracks. He was ordered to walk on the stones before being shot twice in the back. His torment was ended with a final shot to the head. His body was then doused with a flammable liquid and set on fire in hopes of destroying any evidence that could lead to the perpetrators. Having dealt with Newsom, the criminals returned to the house where Shannon remained bound. She endured horrific cruelty the next day, leaving her without a single uninjured area on her body. The sadists concluded their torture by dousing her with bleach and packing her, still alive, into plastic trash bags, where she slowly suffocated. The exact moment when young Vanessa Coleman joined the group was unclear. During interrogations, she claimed to be a hostage herself, participating in the torture out of fear for her life. However, Boyd indicated that Coleman was Davidson's girlfriend and willingly participated in the events, even taking some of Shannon's jewelry and mobile phone. Further, a personal diary found at Vanessa's home contained her descriptions of the horrors at her boyfriend's house, which she referred to as an exciting adventure. The initial trials and sentences during the investigation, it was established that Lamarcus Davidson, born in 1981, was the leader of the criminal group and the primary instigator of the brutal acts against the innocent victims. Davidson tried to deflect blame and downplay his role in the atrocities, attempting to shift responsibility onto the deceased themselves. Davidson claimed that the couple came to his house to buy banned substances and later suggested engaging in rough intimacy with him and his friends, a situation he said spiraled out of control. Remarkably, the defendant's lawyers latched onto this version, attempting to tarnish the reputations of the deceased in court. The parents of the victims later expressed immense emotional anguish over these claims. Nevertheless, Davidson was found guilty on 40 counts, including assault, kidnapping, robbery, and particularly cruel and premeditated termination of life, among others. The jury unanimously decided that Davidson deserved the death penalty for his heinous acts. Latalvis Cobbins, born in 1982, faced the death penalty for his role in the torture, assaults, and involvement in the termination of life. However, he was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. George Thomas, born in 1983, received a similar life sentence for his involvement in the same crimes with no chance of release. Eric Boyd, considering his cooperation with the investigation and assistance in capturing Davidson, was sentenced to 18 years of imprisonment. The relatives of both victims found this sentence outrageously lenient. As for Vanessa Coleman, born in 1988, the only female participant in the atrocities, the investigation proved her involvement in the torture, assaults, and in Shannon's tragic end. She was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Overturned verdicts and new hearings in 2011 while the criminals were serving their sentences and Davidson awaited execution. The case took an unexpected turn. The presiding judge resigned, admitting to a substance dependency. His ability to conduct trials was questioned, and his verdicts over the last 2 years were annulled, leading to new hearings, including the case of Christian and Newsom. A new judge scheduled hearings for all 5 individuals involved in the student's tragic end. After the retrials, Davidson's sentence remained unchanged, death penalty. Cobbins continued to serve his life sentence without the possibility of parole. Thomas, however, received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 51 years. Vanessa Coleman's sentence was reduced from the original 53 years to 35 years. Her appeal in 2014 was rejected and parole was denied in 2017. In 2020, the parole board decided she would remain incarcerated at least until April 2032. Eric Boyd's situation changed most dramatically. Originally receiving a relatively short sentence for cooperating with the investigation, his involvement in the assaults and tragic end of both victims was later proven. His retrial resulted in a life sentence without parole, with his accomplice Thomas testifying against him, revealing previously unknown details about Boyd's role. For his testimony, Thomas, who initially had the possibility of parole after 51 years, had his sentence reduced by 15%, contingent on good behavior. Boyd's attempts to appeal his new sentence were unsuccessful. He is currently serving his sentence in the Bledsoe County Correctional Complex. Davidson remains in the maximum security Riverbend institution, awaiting the execution of his death sentence. Public reaction and the case's impact. As previously mentioned, this trial garnered significant attention, widely covered in the press, and leading to the enactment of two laws. The first was aimed at protecting victims from defamation, attempts to shift blame onto them, and portraying them negatively. This was in response to the defense strategy of the accused and their lawyers, who tried to label the students as drug users and thrill seekers in a troubled neighborhood. These claims were completely false and caused immense pain and suffering to the victims' families. The second law eliminated the need for a judge's signature on a jury's unanimous verdict, which, if in place during this case, could have prevented the need for retrials and sentence reviews. The house at 2316 Chipman Street, which became a torture chamber for the young couple, was demolished in the fall of 2008. A memorial was erected on the site in honor of Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsome. In memory of Christian, a golf tournament and a Christian charity foundation were established, providing support to victims of violence. Similarly, a foundation in Newsome's name was created, holding annual memorial baseball tournaments at Halls Park and awarding a scholarship named after the deceased student and former baseball player. It's important to note that despite the public outcry and widespread attention, the media initially misrepresented details of the case, either accidentally or intentionally. Many believe that the variations in reporting and delayed coverage were influenced by racial motives, as the victims were white and the perpetrators were African American. However, the head of the Association of Criminal Writers and Editors noted, "I can't confidently say that this case would have received more attention if 5 white criminals had been accused of committing similar atrocities against 2 black individuals." Additionally, the Knoxville police chief stated that there was no evidence to suggest these crimes were committed based on racial animosity. In the mid-1990s in Spain, 2 young Romani teenagers, Rosa and Marcelino Vega, defied societal expectations by getting married before reaching legal adulthood. For them and their community, navigating life was already a complex affair. The Romani people, officially termed by the European Union, have been part of Europe for nearly a millennium. As it stands, they are Europe's most significant ethnic minority, numbering between 8 and 10 million. Despite their population size, the Romani continue to face severe challenges from school segregation and forced relocations to being marginalized into ghettos. They also struggle with restricted employment prospects solely based on their heritage and limited access to health care and other essential public services. So far, no resolution from the European Union's governing bodies has managed to effectively address these issues. Yet, despite facing all these adversities, Rosa and Marcelino fell in love and chose to build a life together, adding another layer of uniqueness to their story, especially from a Western perspective, is the fact that they were cousins. Immaculata had a unique dual relationship with Rosa, being both her aunt and mother-in-law, as well as the matriarch to the 4 other children. In the Romani community from which they hailed, there was a strong focus on keeping unions within the family to preserve their cultural heritage and lineage. Such unions were prioritized over relationships with non-Romani individuals, often referred to as peos. At the tender age of 15, Rosa and Marcelino embarked on the journey of family life. Their first son, Adolfo, arrived swiftly and was marked by his quintessential Romani features: dark skin and jet black hair. His grandmother affectionately dubbed him Diablo Moreno, or a dark-skinned devil. Shortly thereafter, Jonathan was born. Unlike his brother, he had lighter skin, which made him appear more like a peo. His blue eyes were as luminous as sunlight dancing on the sea, and his unruly blonde locks earned him the lifelong nickname Chucky, reminiscent of the messy-haired doll from the notorious 90s horror movie. The young family shared a humble abode with Immaculata, a small 2-room wooden house lacking doors, situated in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in Madrid. This settlement was predominantly composed of extended family members, who relied on collective support to navigate their persistent financial struggles. The Vega family, Marcelino's lineage, was an established Romani clan. They had transitioned from agricultural labor to scavenging and selling an assortment of inexpensive goods, from garlic to brass, in a bid to make ends meet. Amid this backdrop of hardship, Rosa and Marcelino received news that they were expecting a third child when Jonathan was still an infant. Their joy was tragically short-lived. On the fateful morning of August 7, 1998, Marcelino, then only 19 years old, died tragically. He was riding in the back seat of a car that crashed at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour on a highway near Barcelona, Spain. Shortly after the tragic loss of Marcelino, Rosa gave birth to a daughter whom she named Carmen. Unfortunately, Marcelino was no longer around to hold her in his arms, leaving Rosa as another young Romani mother facing the challenges of raising her children alone. This was the reality for many impoverished Romani families. They neither controlled lucrative antique markets nor were involved in large drug trafficking operations. Along the way, they had also lost the traditional skill of basket weaving, which once provided extra income. Long gone were the days of field work. They had moved to the city to scrape a living from scavenging. Despite these challenges, they aimed to remain united and uphold the traditions that made them feel at home, no matter where they were. Life moved on for Rosa and her children. Fast forward to Saturday, May 27, 2000, past 2 p.m. in the Romani community of Las Castellanas in San Fernando de Henares. Marcelino's birthday was being commemorated. He would have turned 21 that day had he not died in a car accident 2 years prior. As per Romani custom, the birthdays of the deceased are remembered. To mark the occasion, many in the community visited the cemetery to lay flowers and pay their respects. In Romani culture, the life of a departed loved one is celebrated as well as the life that could have been, no matter how short. On that day, children were running around and playing after having finished their meals. The adults were split between various tasks. Some were scavenging for scrap metal to sell, others were resting after lunch, and some had gone to the cemetery for Marcelino's birthday. Among the group of children, all of whom were cousins, was little Jonathan, the middle child of the late Marcelino and Rosa. By that time, he was already 2 years and 8 months old. Jonathan was an energetic and spirited little boy. On that particular day, his 17-year-old Aunt Isabel was looking after him. She took him and a few of his young cousins to a nearby shopping mall called Prika for an outing. They strolled around for a while, enjoying some sweets before opting to capture the moment in a photo booth. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Isabel, upon collecting the booth's photographs, discovered that Jonathan was missing. In a state of alarm, she combed through the Prika Mall, repeatedly entering and exiting, all the while shouting Jonathan's name. Seeing no trace of him, she raced back to their community to rally the family. By the evening, after formally reporting his disappearance to the police, national authorities joined the search efforts, with firefighters getting involved the following morning. Realizing the gravity of the missing child situation, no one took the matter lightly. Even tracking dogs were deployed, but they yielded no clues regarding Jonathan's whereabouts. Officials soon dismissed the idea that Jonathan had simply wandered off and gotten stuck in nearby natural areas or construction debris. Specifically, the under-construction M45 highway located not far from their settlement was examined but ruled out as a location where Jonathan might have been. The next day, both print and TV news featured the unsettling story of a Romani child kidnapped in broad daylight from a mall. The news stunned and worried the public, highlighting the urgency and seriousness of the situation. The community and authorities continued their search, hoping for any lead that could bring Jonathan back to his family. In reaction, both Rosa's and Marcelino's families invoked their deep-rooted communal bonds, managing to gather over 200 Romani individuals from various cities like Sevilla, Malaga, Barcelona, Oviedo, and Madrid. Day and night, they combed the areas around Madrid. Although financial resources were limited, they created and posted makeshift flyers at gas stations in the vicinity, but all efforts were in vain. As hours turned into days, desperation escalated. Investigators revisited Prika, the scene of Jonathan's disappearance, and reviewed the available security footage, which unfortunately did not offer any insights due to its outdated technology. A woman who claimed to have been at the mall on that fateful Saturday reported seeing a tall, dark man giving a child, who resembled Jonathan, a bag of sweets before leading him to a children's ride. She later saw them at a cafe where the man had a beer before departing with the child. However, her account could not be verified. The chief investigator assured everyone that they were treating the case as a high priority and even initiated an international alert via Interpol. Accompanying Jonathan's picture, they provided his description: blue eyes, blonde hair, approximately 3.3 feet tall, around 55 pounds, with milk teeth, dressed in a blue one-piece suit. With no stone left unturned, his family blanketed Madrid with posters featuring Jonathan's image and a contact number. Unfortunately, the numerous calls received were not all sincere or helpful. Numerous theories were considered, yet none provided answers. The concept of abduction became increasingly likely both within the family and from a law enforcement standpoint. One avenue explored was a potential clash between different Romani families. Authorities questioned countless individuals, and the regional government representative at the time, Francisco Javier Anzuategui, consulted with heads of Romani families in Madrid. All claimed ignorance about the young boy's disappearance, insisting he wasn't in the hands of any clan. Financial motives were also scrutinized. The family revealed they were awaiting a large insurance payment of 25 million pesetas, approximately $139,000 following Marcelino's death, making it conceivable that someone aimed to claim the money. The family was plagued by anomalous phone calls from a hoarse-voiced man asserting he had Jonathan, yet no demands were made. While police pursued this lead, it yielded no results. Disturbingly, other calls came in featuring the sounds of a child crying, heightening the family's anguish. These calls were later traced back to a psychologically unstable woman who used a doll to simulate the cries. As days passed with no ransom request, the likelihood of a kidnapping for financial reasons waned. After 2 torturous weeks, Jonathan's location remained a mystery. During this period, the non-stop ringing of the household phone escalated their emotional turmoil. Calls came from inquisitive journalists or individuals offering moral support, but no concrete help. Jonathan remained headline news, yet this offered no advantage in finding him. Immaculata, a grandmother of 38, epitomized the challenges faced by the poor Romani community, enduring the heartache of the situation while striving to keep her family's spirits alive in the face of such adversity. Prematurely aged by years of hardship and now further diminished by grief, she nonetheless endeavored to support her niece Rosa, a young widow with a child missing. Amidst this devastating situation, Rosa attempted to nurse her 15-month-old daughter Carmen, who was too young to comprehend the tragedy unfolding around her. Rosa was eating poorly and seemed to be withering away from the inside. A report from the newspaper El País depicted their community, Las Castellanas, as a mud-filled hamlet dotted with makeshift dwellings, home to 50 to 60 families and encircled by emaciated, unresponsive dogs. The settlement presented a bleak picture of life on the margins. In the summer of 2000, Rosa received the insurance settlement for Marcelino's untimely death. Although it brought some financial respite, the 14 million pesetas were less than they initially expected. Committed to finding her missing son, Rosa designated 7 million pesetas as a reward for information that could lead to Jonathan. She spent the remaining money on a van and countless flyers featuring Jonathan's image. Rosa also purchased additional phones to handle potential leads and, accompanied by relatives, began a relentless journey. They traveled throughout Spain and even crossed into France and Portugal in the hopes of locating Jonathan. Regrettably, the search only deepened their sense of loss and despair. At just 21 years old, Rosa pledged to continue the search for her son, even if it meant walking the entire country with only a cane to aid her. As days stretched into months, a grueling 6 months had passed when Rosa's hope for a family reunion was brutally dashed. One evening, while watching television, they heard a breaking news report. A truck driver had stumbled upon skeletal remains not far, about 1.5 kilometers away, from the shopping center where Jonathan had last been seen. Given the closeness, it was feared that the remains could be Jonathan's. The news stunned the tight-knit Romani community and extinguished any lingering hope that the boy would be found alive. Interestingly, the media stated that this particular area had supposedly been scoured in the initial frantic searches for Jonathan. The bones were located near the construction site of Madrid's M45 highway. The truck driver had stopped to assess the site before unloading soil from the construction project. When he saw the small skull, he immediately thought of Jonathan and reported his discovery, even as the soil was being dumped at that location. The police acted swiftly, using heavy machinery to unearth a fractured skull and a few ribs with no obvious marks of violence. Nearby, they discovered children's clothing, a blue overall, a shirt and a pair of shoes, all faded but intact. Rosa and Jonathan's grandmother identified these garments as the clothes Jonathan was wearing when he disappeared. To the family, it became clear what had tragically occurred. The authorities advised them to wait for conclusive DNA test results for final verification. A week later, the family received confirmation that the discovered remains were indeed Jonathan's. Rosa, his mother, was so overwhelmed by the news that she had to be hospitalized and treated for acute anxiety. The confirmation brought a tragic closure to the long search, leaving the family to grapple with the painful reality of their loss and the need to seek justice for Jonathan. The emotional toll of searching for her son for 6 months culminated in the heartbreaking discovery of his remains. Debate arose about whether the area where the remains were found had been adequately searched earlier. The local security official claimed that this particular stretch had been overlooked because it was beyond the expected radius of where Jonathan might be found. This discrepancy led to differing opinions among the community and authorities. Some thought the remains had been there all along, while others suspected they had been moved recently. A regular forager and the landowner of the area both stated they hadn't noticed anything unusual. Police refrained from speculating how the fragmented skull, lower jaw, and ribs ended up near the construction site. However, the regional governor suggested that the remains might have been brought there by the truck dumping soil for the construction. The family held fast to their belief that Jonathan was criminally taken, asserting that he would never have wandered off by himself. They clarified, however, that they didn't suspect anyone in particular, noting that if they had, they would have enacted their own form of justice in keeping with the Romani code of an eye for an eye. Clarity remained elusive in the case, and forensic analysis of the remains could not ascertain the cause of Jonathan's death. He was laid to rest in a modest white coffin beside his father, in a funeral attended by just over 20 people, all grappling with the unresolved tragedy. Through it all, Rosa was visibly shattered, unable to stop her tears and suffering from multiple collapses. Although the case remains open, police have made no significant progress. To this day, the circumstances surrounding Jonathan's death remain a mystery, lacking both justice and explanation. March 14, 2003, The Hobbit Pub, Southampton, England. On that evening, everyone at this pub was chilling out. Among them were a girl named Hannah Foster and her friend. Both of them were having a great time there, and when they felt it was getting late, both friends left the pub by 10:50 p.m. Now, since it was quite late at night, Hannah Foster's friend caught a bus from a road named Portswood and headed home. On the other hand, Hannah started walking home because her house was just 800 meters away, roughly 0.5 miles. 3 people lived in Hannah's house: her father, Trevor Foster, her mother, Hilary Foster, and her younger sister, Sarah. The Fosters were early sleepers and early risers, so they usually went to bed early. They assumed that their daughter would come home, eat, and then go to bed on her own. However, when Hannah's mother woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning, she couldn't find Hannah anywhere in the house. Normally, it wouldn't take Hannah more than half an hour to come home, but now several hours had passed. Therefore, Hannah's mother, Hilary, called her daughter, but Hannah wasn't answering any calls. After this, gradually Hannah's father and younger sister also come to know about her. Following this, Hannah's father, Trevor Foster, calls the girl with whom Hannah went to the Hobbit Pub the previous night, but she tells the same story that I've already told you. After this, Hannah's family also tries to find her themselves, but by now it was already 10:30 in the morning, so Hannah's father starts to worry a lot about his daughter. Because of this, he goes to the Southampton police station and files a missing complaint for him. Now the police start investigating the missing person case from their side and first trace her phone. Well, the good thing was that Hannah's phone was active and the police traced the phone through the mobile towers. Naturally, The location of Hannah's phone was showing approximately 20 to 25 miles away from her home. Now the police reached there within an hour. Where the police found Hannah's phone was the city's recycling center, and along with the phone, they also found Hannah's bag there, but Hmel was not found. On March 15th, Hannah is also extensively searched for, but her whereabouts are not found. As they continue the search, March 16th arrives and Southampton police receive a call from an anonymous man from the outskirts of the city. He informs them that he has just seen a girl's body in the bushes. A police team is dispatched to the location provided by the man. Since the previous day, the police have been searching for Hannah Foster, and they also had her picture. Therefore, the police first compare Hannah's picture with the discovered dead body, and they believe it to be Hannah Foster's. Subsequently, Hannah's family is also summoned, and upon seeing a member of their family in this condition, they become quite emotional. Nonetheless, the body is then sent for postmortem. The police have to wait for several hours for it. However, when the postmortem report arrives, it states that Hmel was first written and then murdered by strangulation. However, some traces of the killer's semen were found on Hannah's clothes, and this made the police believe that the case would be solved soon, because DNA would be extracted from the semen and matched with the database to find the killer. But the police's imagination proved wrong when the DNA sample of the killer was not found in their database. Anyway, here the police, losing hope, check Hannah's call details, which leads the investigators to take another step towards solving this case. Actually, Hannah had last called the emergency number 999 from her phone, and the operator had answered the call. The call lasted for 50 seconds. After that, the police reached the operator and collect Hannah's call recording from there. In addition, the operator said, "I kept saying, 'This is emergency helpline, what's an emergency?' for 50 seconds. But there was no response from the other end." When investigators enhanced the recording of Hannah's call, they realized that she is sitting in a moving vehicle. Additionally, there is another faint voice with a South Asian accent. The man asks Hannah questions while she sits quietly, appearing scared and intimidated. After obtaining the call recording, the investigating team accelerates progress in Hannah Foster's murder case. Now the police also check all the CCTV cameras in the area, where Hannah's friend last bid her farewell and caught a bus. After scrutinizing several CCTV footages from that road, the police eventually narrowed down to 7 suspect vehicles. On the other hand, Hannah's parents are eager to see their daughter's killer brought to justice swiftly. They now also discuss these 7 vehicles in public. In the meantime, on March 26th, Hannah's parents talked to people through a local crime TV show called Crime Watch about those cars. As a result, it emerged that one of the 7 suspect vehicles shown on TV was a van belonging to their company, Hazelwood Foods. The supervisor, James Dennis, called in and said that the driver of this van does not have his own vehicle, so he also uses this van to come and go from his home. Furthermore, that night, the driver had gone to deliver on this road. Time and location of the van were exactly where Hannah had started to walk home alone. After that, the police get a good lead for the first time in this case. But the man driving the van was named Maninder Pal Singh Kohli. Upon speaking to the company supervisor, it was found that on the morning of March 15th, Maninder Pal came to work, but there were some marks on his face, whereas there were no marks on his face the previous day, that is on the 14th. Additionally, on March 15th, Maninder only worked half a day and then took half a day off citing a back pain reason. However, it was only later discovered by the police that Maninder hadn't returned to work since that day. Now, hearing the whole story, investigating officers along with forensic experts arrived at Hazelwood Company. Subsequently, the van driven by Maninder was thoroughly examined by forensic experts, and some traces of semen and blood were found in his vehicle as well. With all this evidence, such as Maninder Pal's disappearance, finding semen and blood in his van, they were pointing fingers directly at him for Hannah's murder. However, apart from this, the police once again scrutinized Maninder Pal's van through CCTV cameras, and it becomes clear from the CCTV footage that Maninder Pal had taken his van to the recycling center on the night of March 14th, and where Hannah's body was found, his van had also passed through that road. Maninder Pal had now become the prime suspect for the police. Therefore, the police now embark on the search for Maninder Pal and first they go to his home address, obtained from the sandwich company where he used to work. There, Maninder Pal's wife and 2 children used to live, and his wife was a citizen of the UK. But upon reaching there, the police learn something that completely changes the course of the case. In fact, Maninder's wife reveals that he had actually left for India on March 18th because Maninder's mother was very ill. After learning this, it was imperative for the Southampton police to apprehend Maninder Pal in the Hannah Foster murder case, but it was equally challenging. And then, amidst all this, when a blood sample is taken from one of Maninder Pal's sons and the DNA is extracted from it, it matches the DNA found on Hama's clothes and inside Maninder Pal's van. Now, because a son inherits about half of his father's genes, therefore, the DNA of both the father and son is approximately 99.99% identical. It had already been confirmed that Maninder Pal was indeed the real culprit. After that, the police from England contacts India through the government. Now, since Maninder Pal's ancestral home was in the city of Chandigarh in India, assistance is sought from the police there. Subsequently, the Chandigarh police obtained the address of Maninder's house and reached there. Here, the police find out that Maninder Pal had come to meet his mother a few days ago, but after staying there for 3 to 4 days, he left. Since then, he has not contacted his home. The police also learn another piece of information from Maninder Pal's family at home that when he was in England, he used to wear a turban and keep a beard. When he came to India, he got a clean shave and also got his hair cut. Until now, Hannah's parents had also found out about their daughter's killer, and they were also waiting for him to be caught. But now, the Chandigarh police was not giving this case much priority. By this time, the news of this case had not even appeared in the Indian media, so normal people didn't know much about it. As time passed slowly, there was not much progress in the investigation. Considerable amount of time had passed, so Hannah's parents took it upon themselves to catch the killer. Then, about 15 months after their daughter's death on July 10, 2004, they come to India. At this time, they were only in India for 10 days. After that, they come straight to Chandigarh and speak to the local media there, appealing to catch their daughter's killer, Maninder Pal. Apart from this, Hannah's parents had separate pictures of Maninder. In one photo, he had a beard and a turban, while in another photo, he had shaved his beard and cut his hair. It was easy to identify Maninder through these pictures. After this, Hannah's parents waited for a few days. But then they decided to go to Delhi because there are national and international media offices. After this step by Hannah's parents, the news of their daughter's murders spread throughout India within 24 hours. The headline of every newspaper and news channel became Hannah Foster and Maninder Pal. Here, Hannah's parents also arranged a free hotline so that anyone who knew about the murderer could call this number. The Southampton police here announced through a news agency called The Sun that they would give 5 million Indian rupees to the person who provides any information about Maninder Pal. By now, this news had spread like wildfire throughout India. Then, on July 15, 2004, a car driver residing in the city of Darjeeling in the state of West Bengal, India, called a retired police officer whom he knew. Now this police officer had already retired. The driver called the officer and told him, "There is a man who has been living here for a few months, and his appearance resembles that of Hannah Foster's killer, as shown in the news. He started appearing here shortly after Hannah's murder." Upon hearing the driver's words, the retired officer immediately sets out to see this man. The officer remembered Maninder Pal's face because they were following this case through the news channel. Afterwards, when that driver showed the police officer the man, the officer was quite surprised. Then he immediately contacted the local police, and the local police caught Maninder Pal in the bus going from Kalimpong town to Nepal. Here the police find out that Maninder Pal was planning to flee to Nepal, after seeing his news on TV channels and newspapers. Besides, the police also find out that Maninder Pal had changed his name to Mike Davis in West Bengal. In addition to Maninder, there was also a woman on the bus, and then it was revealed that Maninder had remarried after coming to India. Now Maninder was arrested and brought to Delhi, and during the custody of a few days here, Maninder confessed to his crime. Then he told the whole story of how he murdered Hannah that night. The story was something like this. Actually, on the night of March 14, 2003, Maninder was parked on that road drinking in his van where Hannah passed by. But when he saw Hannah, bad thoughts started coming to his mind. Afterwards, he forcibly kidnapped Hannah and placed her in the van. Although there, Hannah requested to be released from Manander, but Manander paid no heed to her requests. In the meantime, Hannah also called the emergency helpline number, but due to Manninger's presence, she couldn't say anything. This led the call operator to believe it might be a misdial. Later, Manninger takes Hannah to a deserted area and rapes her. However, after committing the crime, he realizes that if he lets Hannah go alive, she will go to the police and file a complaint. Therefore, Manninger strangles her to death. Then he disposes of Hannah's body where it was found. On March 15th, the next day, Maninder takes half a day off from work under the pretext of a back pain. But he had Hannah's mobile phone and handbag with him, so he dumps them in a recycling bin at the city recycling center. Afterwards, he goes to one of his friends and asks for some money on loan because he had to go to India to meet his sick mother. However, his friend doesn't have as much money as Maninder needed. Then Maninder comes back home and also tells his British wife that his mother is sick in India, and he needs to go there and require some money. Understanding Maninder's need, his wife talks to her father, and on March 17th, Maninder's father-in-law lends him some money. The very next day, Maninder catches a flight to India. However, the excuse of his mother being sick was just a pretext. In reality, Maninder had come to India to escape from the England police. Upon arriving in India, Maninder goes to Chandigarh. His ancestral home meets his mother, but here he completely changes his appearance. After changing his appearance, Maninder goes to Darjeeling, and after some time he changes his name and marries another woman there, where he starts living thereafter. Now, because neither anyone in India knew about Hannah Foster's murder nor about Maninder Pal, Maninder wasn't caught for 15 months. But then when Hannah's parents come to India, only then is Maninder caught. Anyway, after that, Menendez is brought to Delhi, and then on July 28, 2004, giving an interview to a news channel, he confessed his crime on TV, but upon the whole incident while confessing, Maninder denies and says, "That night I had drunk a lot, didn't want to kill Hannah, but when I met her, then Hannah started threatening to complain to the police. Although I threatened her a lot, but she didn't agree, which led me to kill her." However, in August 2004, Maninder Pal changed his statement. He said, "I didn't do all this willingly, but it was done to me forcibly." After this statement, Mallister was placed under judicial custody in Delhi, and then the process of extradition to Britain begins. This process takes about 3 years, but finally on June 8, 2007, the court granted permission for Maninder Pal to go to England. Once in England, Hampshire police arrest Maninder. Then Menendez's blood sample is taken, and it matches 100% with the DNA found from Hannah's clothes and semen obtained from the van. After that, from December 10, 2007, the trial begins in the Winchester Crown Court. Here, Menendez appeals not guilty to all the charges against him. Menendez said that night, "Some criminals broke the window of the van and threw Hannah's body inside the van. Now, because they was drunk to trap me, those criminals forced me to rip Hannah, and they may even force to kill her." Even in court, Hazelwood Fruits Company supervisor James Dennis testified, but Maninder said, "I borrowed €16,000 from James, and he is also under the misconception that I am having an affair with his wife. That's why James is targeting me." Maninder also said maybe James hired those 3 men to frame me and forced me to commit this crime on the night of March 14th. But in the end, when the police investigated Maninder's all statements, it all turned out to be lies. And finally, on November 25, 2008, all the allegations against Maninder were proven. After that, he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Now he will be imprisoned without parole for at least 24 years. At the time of sentencing, he was 41 years old, and he will remain in jail until 2030. Of the 5 million rupees reward offered for catching Maninder Pal, 367,000 rupees were given to the taxi driver who first informed the police about Maninder Pal. With this, the money was divided among 12 other people because besides the taxi driver Jason Lepsha, those people also played an important role in solving this case. However, Jason used that money to buy land and then established a school for disadvantaged children on it, named the Hannah Memorial Academy in Foster's memory. Then, in 2006, when Hmmel's parents visited Darjeeling and learned about this, they were very pleased. When these people returned to England, Hmmel's parents started a registered charity to help Jason along with other people. This now greatly helps Jason Lepsch's school. So friends, this was the complete story of the Hannah Foster murder case. Bethany Ann Sinclair was born October 15, 1985 and nicknamed Beth. She and her mother, Tina Sinclair, lived with Tina's boyfriend, Eugene Van Bowman Jr. on Mountain Road in Chesterfield, New Hampshire in 2001. Eugene goes by his middle name Van. According to reports filed by Chesterfield police officers, several visits were made to the residence for domestic incidents while Beth and Tina lived there. One time, Van allegedly doused Tina in kerosene and attempted to ignite it, but was never charged with the crime. 15-year-old Beth and her mother 34-year-old Tina were reported missing on February 10, 2001. But according to Van, they were last seen 6 days earlier. Van told police that he and Tina had an argument the day before, and he left the house only to return 2 hours later to find Tina and Beth and some of their belongings gone. However, their beloved 15-year-old cat and Tina's vehicle were still at the residence. Van told police that the car had a flat tire and they must have called for a ride. The last known person to talk to Beth was her boyfriend. They talked on the phone the night before they disappeared from 11:30 p.m. to midnight and made plans for Valentine's. Someone called Keene High School on February 5th, the day after they disappeared, to report Beth was sick and would miss school. Authorities are uncertain of the caller's identity, but stated the employee believed it to be a woman's voice. Tina's sister, Sharon Gary, said that she had been concerned for Beth's safety because Van had been charged with molesting his 8-year-old daughter years prior in 1991, but it would be 10 years before he would face charges. Sharon had pleaded with her sister to allow Beth to come live with her in Connecticut to keep her away from him. He pleaded guilty to the crime the same year Beth and Tina went missing. He was released on parole but arrested again after violating his parole. Sadly, Sharon and Tina had an argument in October of 2000 regarding the situation and had not spoken since that time. According to Sharon, Tina said that she would get herself out of the relationship with Van, but that never happened. Sharon does not believe that Tina left of her own accord with Beth in February 2001. At the time, Tina had just graduated from cosmetology school and dreamed of opening her own beauty salon. Beth's father, Tina's ex-husband, said he did not believe she would have left without telling anyone. There has not been any activity on Tina's bank account, cell phone, or credit card since her disappearance, and she never cashed her last paycheck. There has also been no activity on either of their social security numbers. Van's home bordered the Connecticut River, and he was seen on the river in his yellow Scat hovercraft at 4:30 a.m. on February 4th, just a few hours after Beth had hung up the phone with her boyfriend. However, an extensive search of the area produced no clues as to their whereabouts. Authorities suspect that foul play was involved in their cases. Suspiciously, Van has reportedly refused to cooperate with investigators. He has not been named as a suspect, but is being called a person of interest. When Sharon went to the home, she found a carving in the cement floor of the garage that must have been done when it was wet. It said Tina, Bethany, and Van with the date 2000 and a flower, but the names Tina and Bethany had been chipped away and Van has since sold the home. No one has been arrested in this case, and as of today, it remains unsolved. Curtis Pahan was born July 11, 1959 and went by the nickname Kurt. After graduating high school, he worked for a while as a police dispatcher, then joined the Army where he served as a military police officer in Korea. In 1983, he joined the Concord Police Department in Concord, New Hampshire after returning to the U.S. He was a police officer in Concord for 10 years, but had to retire from the job when he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1994. In 1998, he began working the graveyard shift as a security guard at Venture Corporation in Seabrook. The business manufactured plastic parts for automobiles, but has since shut down. The job had fewer physical requirements than a police officer's and didn't require him to carry a gun, which would have been difficult due to his limited mobility. At the time he got the new job, He was living at the Highland Inn, a residential motel on Highland Avenue in Hampton. His family stated that he rarely socialized and was often depressed as the result of his medical condition. On July 3, 2000, he bought a gun back from his father that he had sold to him several years earlier when he was having financial difficulties. He had a legal permit to carry the gun concealed and kept it loaded. The next day, he arrived at work at approximately 9:30 p.m. and his coworkers said he appeared to be in good spirits and was behaving normally at the time. His supervisor called and checked in with him at approximately 12 a.m. and there were no issues to report. Around the same time, there were reportedly 2 cars full of rowdy individuals parked at the extra mark across the street. Soon after, his vehicle caught fire in the parking lot and he called the fire department after attempting to extinguish the fire himself. Firefighters stated that he appeared very calm considering his car was a total loss and a lot of his belongings, including some of his most treasured possessions, were lost in the fire. It is unknown how the fire started, though investigators believe he may have started it accidentally or that it was started by criminals in order to provide a distraction while they committed a crime. However, his car contained no signs of accelerants or accidental ignition. About 3:20 a.m., an hour and a half after the fire was extinguished, the security supervisor for the factory talked with Kurt, who said he felt fine about it. The supervisor left him at 3:25 a.m. 20 minutes later, a worker arriving at the factory noticed that he wasn't at his station. Kurt's last entry in his logbook was placed at 2 a.m. upon the fire department's arrival at the scene. Several co-workers taking a break saw him walking around the factory at approximately 3:15 a.m. This was the last reported sighting of him. About 15 minutes later, a night shift foreman noticed 2 vehicles speeding away from the factory. It's reported that a door had been kicked and 2 vending machines and a coin machine in the factory were damaged during his shift that night. It is suspected that the vandalism may have something to do with his disappearance. Kurt had recently told his family that he was concerned about possible illegal activity, including drug deals in Venture Corporation's parking lot. He told loved ones that he feared for his safety and stated that a coworker had threatened to kill him over a parking ticket he had given him. The night of his disappearance, only about a dozen employees were working in the factory instead of the usual 100 due to the July 4th holiday, and he was concerned because he had no backup in case anything went wrong on the job. The gun Kurt purchased from his father was located inside his apartment at the Highland Inn after his disappearance, and it was still wrapped in the paper bag his father had sold it to him in. His family does not believe he committed suicide, and there is no evidence to lead investigators to theorize he killed himself. There were no deliveries to the plant that night and no taxis made pickups in the area at the time of his disappearance. The only calls he placed from the guard shack that night were to his mother. Multiple sclerosis would have made it difficult for him to have walked very far. His loved ones believe foul play was involved in his disappearance and they believe he was abducted and murdered. A coworker of his, Robert April, is considered a person of interest in his case. Multiple people reported that Robert allegedly bragged that he killed Kurt when he caught him stealing at the factory and then buried his body. Despite being named numerous times in local media as a suspect, he has never given an interview or made any public statements in an attempt to clear his name. He also refused a polygraph test when he was officially questioned by police. He has been in trouble with the law since, but in each case he was either acquitted or the charges were dropped. It is speculated that 2 employees of the factory set Kurt's car on fire to create a diversion while they used forklifts to break into the vending and coin machines, but were caught by Kurt, which ultimately led to his murder. Recently, investigators have stated that information gathered over time has helped them piece together what happened, including the identity of the person they believed murdered Curtis. But a lack of witness testimony has kept the case from closing. Kurt was declared legally dead in April of 2008, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. Michael Anthony McClean was born February 5, 1990 to Edward Impala and is nicknamed Mike. He is described as funny, humble, and very kind. He went to Stanford High School in Connecticut and then earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Hester College, which is now called Mount Washington College. In 2019, 29-year-old Mike lived in Manchester and was employed by Easter Seals New Hampshire, a non-profit organization that provides resources for people with disabilities, veterans, and senior citizens. He was specifically working with autistic children. April 21, 2019. He went to the Tropical Lounge nightclub with a couple friends in Nashua, New Hampshire. While Mike and his friends were at the nightclub, there was an altercation in the parking lot as the club was closing between two women, one of whom Mike knew Mike, and the woman had been dancing prior to the altercation, and it is reported that her ex-boyfriend was also in the club at the time. Mike intervened in the altercation between the two women and tried to de-escalate the situation, but the crowd didn't disperse until the police arrived at 1:45 a.m. and he became separated from his friends. He was seen walking on East Hollis Street towards McDonald's. He then called his boss, Nicole, who was a friend of his, at 1:49 a.m. and said, "They're after me more than one." And then the call ended. She tried calling him right back, but there was no answer. She attempted to call him once more and then sent him several texts, but he did not reply. He also sent 3 texts to a neighbor that read help at 1:55 a.m. and another text that was garbled and a third one that read Eldridge Bro at 2:15 a.m. The last text sent to his neighbor was sent at 2:27 a.m. due to the garbled nature of the text. Authorities believe he was using voice to text at the time and the texts were possibly accidentally sent. Eldridge may have been a reference to an alley called Eldridge Street, which is near the nightclub. He was then seen at the McDonald's around 2:30 a.m. where he got something to eat. This is where his phone last pinged and the battery most likely died. He then was seen entering a Speedway gas station and asked to use the phone. He was last sighted on video surveillance entering and exiting a parking garage at the condo complex Riverfront Landing in the area of Bancroft Street and the Merrimack River at 3:30 a.m. His family believes he went to the condo complex to make it look as if he lived there by the people that were supposedly following him. He was not familiar with his surroundings and the area he was in was considered very dangerous, especially at night. He was reported missing Monday morning by his roommate when he didn't come home to his apartment. It is not clear if he met with foul play or fell into the Merrimack River outside of the condo complex. His family is devastated and desperate for answers, and as of today, this case remains unsolved. Denise Robert was born on November 28, 1952 in Manchester, New Hampshire, and was the oldest of 12 children. She lived in Bedford, New Hampshire, in a quiet residential community. She loved to exercise and is described as sweet, energetic, creative, and lived life on her own terms. She had worked in advertising sales for the New Hampshire Union Leader since 1983, the state's largest newspaper. On August 30th, 2015, 62-year-old Denise went to the Executive Health and Sports Center in Manchester, followed by trips to Vitamin World, Walmart, and Honey Ford. She drove her copper-colored Volvo to and from the stores before parking in the Brookside Congregational Church parking lot at the corner of Elm and Clark Streets. Investigators released a Walmart surveillance image of Denise to the public. She then went on her routine Sunday evening walk as she had done for years on Race Street, located in the city's North End. That is when someone decided to take her life and shot her. Neighbors stated that they heard one gunshot and possibly a red or dark pickup truck driving away from the scene. A woman named Katie, a columnist for the Daily, told the Union Leader she was driving on Union Street between 8:30 and 8:45 p.m. when she saw what appeared to be a rusty and old pickup truck that had been driving east on Carpenter Street speeding on Union Street. The driver of the truck is described as possibly a white male in his 20s to 30s with short cropped hair. In May 2017, police returned to the scene using metal detectors and a canine and searched the grounds of a property near the crime scene. Denise's brother believes they were looking to recover the bullet that killed his sister. Later in 2017, investigators searched a home on Kendall Pond Road in Londonderry, New Hampshire in connection to the murder, but no other details have been released. Her family and 11 siblings have never given up hope that their sister will get justice. There is still a $45,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Denise's killer, but as of today, the case remains unsolved. William Martin Vosler was born on April 21, 1984, and Charles Jason Vosler was born on December 9, 1982 in Exeter, New Hampshire, to parents Ruth Parker and Charles Martin Vosler Jr. In 1980, Charles Vosler placed an ad in the Classified stating that he was a businessman who dreamed of living a simple life, and Ruth Parker found the ad intriguing enough to begin writing letters and having phone conversations with him for less than a year. Ruth then packed up and moved from Wisconsin to New Hampshire to marry him. But after 6 years of marriage and 2 children later, the couple divorced. Charles would often get the boys on the weekends. But on October 9, 1986, Charles told Ruth that he was taking the boys out of state for the weekend to visit relatives. William went by the nickname Billy and little Charles went by the nickname CJ, and they were 2 and 3 years old respectively. Charles would never bring the boys home and Ruth would never see her sons again. After leaving New Hampshire, he would call and tell her that they were in Connecticut visiting his aunt and he would be extending his time with them until the following day. However, when they didn't return, she went to the real estate office where Charles worked and saw his employees packing up and leaving with boxes. The prior Friday, the day he picked up the boys, he had shut down the office and let all his employees go without her knowing. He had also taken every single picture she had of the boys so that she wouldn't have a picture to show authorities. He also took address books and credit cards and many of Ruth's belongings. He emptied their bank accounts and auctioned off a lot of things the family had in storage. When Ruth went to the authorities in Rochester, New Hampshire, to tell them her children were kidnapped by their own father, she says detectives were hesitant to act. In the 1980s, parental kidnapping wasn't considered a serious crime. Ruth later determined that Charles had been planning to kidnap the boys for a long time. He had removed her name from their joint checking accounts and stopped the automatic payments to her car so that by the time of the abduction, she would be months behind on the payments and the car would be close to being repossessed. 6 weeks after the boys went missing, a family friend remembered that they had once taken home videos of CJ and Billy. The authorities were able to capture images from that video to use for posters and age progression images. In hindsight, Ruth says that prior to the kidnappings, Charles was behaving strangely, but she didn't notice at the time. For instance, Charles owned a horse that he loved. But Ruth says one time she went by the house and the horse was gone. She was told he had sold it to a neighbor. Ruth also remembers when they were married that Charles asked her to quit her job in social work because he said it would be best for the family and their efforts to live a simpler lifestyle. At the time it made sense, so Ruth went along with his request. Ruth believes he was trying to eliminate her support system and her income before he took off with the boys. Ruth also says that when friends called to talk to her, Charles would tell them she was unavailable and then hang up the phone. Charles Martin had been married twice before, and when he divorced his first wife, he told her she was lucky they had no children because he would have taken them away from her. A private investigator who has worked on the case believes Charles deliberately selected Ruth to bear his children with plans to keep the children for himself. On February 5, 1987, the state of New Hampshire issued warrants for Charles Martin for interference of custody. On April 3, 1987, a federal warrant for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution was issued for him. In 1987, a woman who lived in Stillwell, Oklahoma reported that she was seeing a man named Charles Wilson and that he had 2 boys. She later called the Child Fund hotline after noticing photos of the missing boys on a missing child poster that matched the children of Charles. But when the authorities arrived 9 days later, they could not arrest him because he had burned his house and his car and some belongings and fled. He was also known to have been in Oklahoma in December of 2006, but there has been no indication of his, Billy or CJ's whereabouts since then. Charles has ties to Connecticut, New Jersey, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, and Florida, and sometimes goes by his nickname Charlie. He may use the middle names Malcolm and or Martin or the last names Amidon, Foster and or Wilson. His actual date of birth is March 6, 1942, but he may use the alias dates of birth, March 6, 1943 and or February 6, 1944. He also has a noticeable twitch in his right eye when he is stressed. He's described as Caucasian, 6'1" and 220 pounds, with blue eyes, brown hair, which may be grayed now. He would be 79 years old in 2021 and is wanted by the FBI for the abduction of the boys. If you have any information on this case, call 1-800-THE-LOST and there is a reward being offered. Billy and CJ were abducted 33 years ago. This is a new artist's perspective on Charles's age progression using real photos to age them. Billy and CJ's mother Ruth has a Facebook page dedicated to her sons called Ruth's Boys. She now lives in North Carolina and says she will never give up on finding her sons and still hopes to hear from them. But as of today, this case remains unsolved. Case of Lauren Stewart. Lauren Stewart, a 45-year-old woman, seemed to live a life of perfection. She was a devoted wife to Dan, a caring mother to her adult children, Stephen and Bethany, and it appeared that she had been blessed by fate. However, in the weeks leading up to her unimaginable act, she ventured into a dark world, exploring disturbing content on YouTube and researching methods to end her own life, eventually becoming skilled in the use of a Glock handgun. Lauren Devine Stewart was born on January 9, 1973, and she spent most of her life in Michigan. Her work history included part-time personal training at the YMCA in Farmington Hills and occasional house cleaning. After leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses, she had pursued modeling and acting, exploring her creative side through workshops and networking with photographers. She was regarded as a charming and very pleasant woman. Lauren was married to a man named Daniel Stewart, who worked at the University of Michigan as a leading software architect, dedicated to developing technology for predicting heart attacks. He had many years of experience as a code developer in the technology industry. Together with his wife, they were devout Christians within the Jehovah's Witness denomination for an extended period until 2013, when they decided to explore and take a different approach to their spiritual life. The couple had two accomplished children, 27-year-old Stephen, a data solution architect, and 24-year-old Bethany, a computer whiz who showcased her talents in art and graphic design. At 45, Lauren Stewart had it all: a flourishing husband, two college-educated children, a budding modeling career, and a charming Keogh Harbor home adorned with a welcoming heart wreath on the door. However, beneath this facade of perfection, she grappled with a hidden pain. Lauren had experienced the heartache of exclusion and rejection from the religion she and her husband Daniel had embraced just a few years earlier. Lauren and her husband decided to leave the Jehovah's Witness faith, a Christian denomination known for its strict indoctrination and the practice of shunning former members. The seemingly perfect exterior concealed a complex web of emotions and decisions that would soon unfold into a captivating narrative. Up until 2013, Lauren and her family had been devout Jehovah's Witnesses, strictly adhering to beliefs that eschewed celebrations like birthdays, Easter, Christmas, or any other event they believed contradicted the teachings of Christ. Additionally, their faith strongly discouraged higher education, putting Stephen and Bethany at risk of being excommunicated if they pursued college. However, Dan envisioned a brighter future for their children through higher education. When they sought approval from the church elders to allow their kids to pursue degrees, the response was firm: disobey the church's policies and face disfellowship. This threat weighed heavily on the Stewart, as almost everyone they knew, including their extended family, were part of the congregation. According to the church's rules, excommunication would mean complete isolation, even from their own flesh and blood. After careful consideration, the Stewart made a bold decision to leave the religion they had long embraced. Although it initially felt right, the community's disapproval became unbearable, especially for Lauren. She described how routine tasks like grocery shopping were marred by dirty looks and hurtful comments from people she once believed were her friends, even though the belittling remarks were not directed at her. Living in a small community of just 3,300 residents, many of whom were Jehovah's Witnesses, the Stewarts struggled with the reality that the church-approved members would constantly remind them of their outcast status whenever they had the chance. This emotional burden became too much to bear, leading to a breaking point, and in search of a lifeline, Lauren turned to the gym, making it a regular part of her life to rebuild her physical and mental well-being. Her remarkable transformation allowed her to secure a job as a fitness instructor, and she was even able to leverage her natural beauty to become a successful model, surprising those who crossed her path. During this period, Laura seemed pleasant and optimistic despite her church's rejection. However, beneath her confident facade, she was deeply and immensely suffering from chronic depression. an affliction that had plagued her even before the shunning intensified with each passing day. In a desperate attempt to mask her inner turmoil, she would occasionally let glimpses of her distress show through, only to quickly conceal them with a forced smile. One of Laura's most closely guarded secrets was the family's crippling debt, which was pushing them to the brink of ruin. Confronted with this dual onslaught of financial and emotional distress, she devised a plan to resolve all her problems at once. Haunted by her inner turmoil, Lauren Stewart's downward spiral was deeply chilling and heartbreaking. She delved into grim research, scouring YouTube for methods of ending her own life and instructional videos on handling a handgun, all leading up to a fateful day on February 15, 2018. She left a poignant note on the dinner table, meticulously tidied the home, and texted her loved ones as well as her husband's boss just before the unthinkable act. At 9:24 a.m., she turned over all the family photos on a secretary desk and sent a message to her husband's boss, stating that Dan had an accident and died. The boss reached out for further details but received no response. Hours later, at 5:07 p.m. on the same day, she reached out to her cousin confessing that she had become evil. She stated that she had taken her husband and kids with her so they would not have to feel the impact of her selfish act and that they would sleep until Christ resurrects them. Her cousin responded, urging her not to proceed with her plan. Lauren had become increasingly detached from reality in recent months, unbeknownst to her family. She had a pistol in her possession and had tragically decided to use it against the very people she professed to love. Her first victim was her husband, 47-year-old Dan, whom she shot in the head as he attempted to flee. With her most significant threat eliminated, she went upstairs to her 24-year-old daughter Bethany's room, where Bethany was asleep, and ended her daughter's life without hesitation. Next, her son Stephen, who lived in his own place across town, unknowingly arrived at the family home. Lured by false pretenses, with his back turned, unaware of the imminent danger, Lauren, the mother he loved, shot him at point-blank range. The horrifying scene didn't end there, as Lauren took the life of the family dog, placing its body in the bathtub. A neighbor had heard these shots, but assumed someone was slamming doors. The house became a chilling temporary morgue, and Lauren meticulously tidied up. The darkness culminated as Lauren turned the gun on herself, using a method she had researched online. The cousin who Lauren had texted tried texting her back, but Lauren never responded. The next morning, on February 16th, the cousin went over to her house with a friend, and when they received no response at the door, they contacted the police for a check. When the police arrived at the house that morning, the kitchen was organized, the refrigerator was stopped, and handwritten labels were on various items, with a calendar hanging on the refrigerator. Their discovery began with the family dog in the bathtub, triggering a chilling response from the officers who feared there was an active shooter. They found Stephen Stewart on the floor, believed to have been shot while seated on a chair in another room. Bethany lay lifeless, shot in her sleep with a pillow muffling the sound. Dan Stewart was discovered on the basement floor in front of a couch, his right hand still in his jeans pocket. The slightly pulled white pocket liner on his left pocket suggested he was standing when he was shot, and attempted to react, thus pulling the pocket liner. Upstairs, Lauren was discovered at the base of the stairs, a pistol by her side, her self-inflicted wound between the eyes echoing her online research. 2 notes were found on the dinner table. One was for the medical examiner, while the other, a chilling suicide note, exposed Lauren's inner turmoil. She wrote, "I allowed evil into my heart when I chose not to accept God's free love, and it made me sick inside. I killed my family because I know my death would stumble them. At least now they will not suffer and will be resurrected to life forever in peace." As the police investigated the Stewarts' lives, a complex and puzzling picture began to emerge. Interviews with family, friends and neighbors described the couple as reclusive, with a sense of estrangement after leaving the Jehovah's Witness church. Lauren's past was marked by her own personal challenges, and some family members said she suffered from depression, which was further exacerbated by the demands of motherhood. In recent years, she became increasingly fixated on religion, often engaging in impassioned outbursts. Her family members, including her father and sister, revealed the extent of the emotional distance that had grown over time, and they had not spoken to her in years. Her mother had passed away when she was 13 years old. Estranged for years, they saw Dan as the catalyst pulling Lauren away from them, and never really cared about him. They also shared troubling insights about the couple's mental health, characterizing their relationship as a fusion of mutual distress. To those who knew Lauren, her defiance of the Jehovah's Witness faith marked her as an apostate, a label that spoke to her outspoken opposition to the organization and her decision to leave it. The heart-wrenching tragedy left a deep scar on the lives of those who knew the family intimately. Joyce Taylor, a longtime family friend, was visibly shaken, believing that the murders were a direct consequence of the Stewarts' rejection by the Jehovah's Witnesses. Taylor and other former members shed light on the harsh reality of leaving the faith. They explained that once you depart from the church, even your own family members who remain within its fold are forbidden from interacting with you, a severe form of shunning that takes a heavy emotional toll. According to Taylor, Lauren and Daniel's desire to provide their children with a college education clashed head-on with the religion's teachings, which frowned upon such pursuits. The collision between their aspirations and the rigid doctrines of their faith set the stage for a tragic unraveling. They were shunned everywhere and every way possible. As Taylor said, if Lauren went to the grocery store, they didn't look her in the eye. When you're raised a Jehovah's Witness, they choose your friends, they choose who you associate with, and if you go against that, they will disfellowship you or shun you. In a shocking turn of events, Joyce Taylor stormed into a Kingdom Hall meeting in Union Lake, seizing the moment to confront the congregation. Standing on a chair, she boldly criticized the gathering, her voice resonating with a mix of anger and sorrow. "Excuse me, everyone," she declared. "My name is Joyce Taylor. 2 days ago, 4 people died as a result of your shunning process." Taylor's outburst sent shockwaves through the room as she pushed away congregants and vented her pent-up frustration, shouting, "5 years ago, you people pulled your support from this small family. The only support they had was you people. You turned them away and you shunned them. And for what?" she exclaimed, "because they wanted to raise their children as they saw fit." The police were aware of the family's issues with their former church, but declined to comment. Police records detailed how Lauren had recorded a poignant 2-minute video on February 6th at 11 p.m., explaining the depths of her despair. She cited a multitude of issues, expressing her inability to carry on and her desire not to burden others any longer. Abandoned by her church family, Lauren found herself drowning in a relentless sea of despair, with what she believed to be the only escape, death. Convinced that ending her own life was the solution to her unbearable suffering, she made the agonizing choice to also take the lives of her loved ones, sparing them what she perceived as the inevitable shame and suffering that her actions would bring upon their household. Police records painted a grim picture of Lauren's mental state in the lead-up to the tragedy, noting her unmistakable signs of severe depression and increasingly abnormal behavior. It appeared that she had immersed herself in a personal interpretation of religion, intensifying her depression. Shockingly, she never sought professional help or counseling, and no prescription drugs or alcohol were found in her system. However, traces of marijuana were discovered not just in Lauren's system, but also in her husband and sons. The police investigation unraveled a complex web of factors contributing to her devastating actions. Loneliness, the severed ties with family and friends over religious differences, and deep-seated emotional scars stemming from alleged childhood sexual abuse, all converging to amplify her anguish and ultimately driving her to commit the unthinkable. In a striking testament to the estrangement within the family, Lauren's sister's response spoke volumes. She exhibited a somber demeanor and expressed a surprising lack of surprise when hearing the news of her sisters, demonstrating just how far Lauren had drifted from her own sister, who even showed little regret about the tragedy. While the motives behind Lauren Stewart's horrifying actions may have been due to the profound isolation imposed by her former church and her childhood trauma, it begs the question, could things have taken a different turn had she reached out for help when she felt suffocated by her circumstances? Tragically, rather than seeking counseling or professional guidance, Lauren chose a path of self-destruction with devastating consequences for all involved. As we reflect on this heartbreaking tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. Todd Little Bull was an Oglala Lakota Indian born on August 2, 1990 to Ronald and Regina. He grew up on the Oglala Sioux Indian Reservation at Pine Ridge in South Dakota. The reservation is located about an hour and a half east of Mount Rushmore, as the site of the infamous Wounded Knee Massacre and home to native luminaries such as Red Cloud, Black Elk, and Crazy Horse. It is one of the most influential Indian homelands in America. Today, Pine Ridge also has among the highest suicide, homicide, and poverty rates of any community in the country. When Todd was in his mid-20s, he began exposing the corruption of a dangerously deceptive cult called Thunder Valley and its fraudulent medicine man, Jerome LeBeau. LeBeau is described as an evil charlatan who many believe bears responsibility for the devastating suicides and murders that swept the reservation in 2016. Thunder Valley is described as a criminal corporation disguised as a community development program to make money off manipulation, murder, and misery. Thunder Valley was founded by Nick Tilson, the grandson of Ken Tilson, an attorney who was heavily involved in the cover-up of the rape and murder of a young indigenous woman named Annie Mayaquash during the Wounded Knee occupation in 1975. After her death, her wallet was found in Ken Tilson's possession. After 30 years, 2 American Indian Movement members and associates of Nick Tilson's grandfather, Arlo Looking Cloud and John Graham, were convicted of the murder of Annie Mayaquash. In October 2010, Thunder Valley received nearly $1 million in the form of a HUD Sustainable Communities Planning grant. And in September 2015, the USDA awarded Thunder Valley, CDC, another $2.6 million. But one source reports that the money isn't being used in Pine Ridge as it is supposed to be. It is said that Thunder Valley doesn't have the best interest of all their people in mind, only themselves and those who join them. Todd Little Bull joined Thunder Valley and originally believed that LeBeau was someone he could learn the spiritual ways of the Lakota people from. Proud of his heritage, he actively sought to promote and improve his culture. But at some point, he learned that they were not what they claimed to be and had ulterior motives. He claimed he was asked to shake gourds, turn on small blue lights, and blow whistles during ceremonies, among other things, to trick those in attendance. He began spreading the word via social media of their wrongdoings, which led to them threatening his life. On his 26th birthday, Todd was posting on Facebook all the threats he was receiving from Thunder Valley. Sadly, he would be shot and killed that same day. He was killed sometime around midnight shortly after posting a voice message from a man named Jack Conroy. The message was left on Facebook Messenger and Little Bull wrote, "One of many threats." This was posted at 11:36 p.m. on Monday, August 1st. A screenshot of an alleged threat to Little Bull from a man named Trey Boku surfaced the day of the murder and was shared widely across Indian country. These 2 alleged threats came as a result of Little Bull's coming forward with information he supposedly had regarding the illegitimate spiritual practices of Jerome LeBeau. Little Bull said in these posts, "Their family is so loving and compassionate. I put my heart into everything that I've done for them. By that I mean praying with them in the beautiful way that we pray." Around 2:07 a.m. he again posts about the threats he was receiving. Soon after his post, Little Bull was shot and killed, and many believe the murder was ordered by LeBeau. Little Bull was one of 4 people gunned down on the reservation from July to October in 2016. In July, 13-year-old Taka Clifford was killed while walking home with her friends. Todd Little Bull was fatally shot in August. 34-year-old Chuntasuta Weikelhoff was killed on September 29th, and 29-year-old Vincent Brewer was the 4th person to be murdered in the string of shootings on the Pine Ridge Reservation just that summer. The local paper quoted the Sioux tribal president John Yellowbird Steele as saying that all 4 cases were likely related to drugs. Friends and family of Little Bull still seek justice, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. Alicia Marie Hmel was born Alicia Marie Fulkers on June 27, 1985 to Laura and Jimmy, and lived in Sioux City, Iowa. She was raised by her grandparents and attended East High School. She was described by loved ones as having a gentle soul and always there for others with a zest for life. When she was a junior in high school, she met Tony Hmel and the 2 began dating. After graduation, she would attend South Dakota State University to pursue a degree in nursing, But during her third year of college, she would change her major and join the military. However, she would be medically discharged from basic training following a knee injury. She graduated college in 2009 with a degree in communication studies and planned to go back for her master's in speech pathology. She and Tony would marry in 2011 after 8 years of dating. A few years later, Tony allegedly began having an affair with another woman. Alicia would move back in with her grandparents, but would try and reconcile with Tony. When this failed, she had a difficult time and the two would eventually discuss divorce. At the time, she was working as a preschool teacher, and on her first day of summer vacation, she came up with the idea to go fishing. On May 31st, 2015, she posted on Facebook that she wanted to go fishing, something she enjoyed, and it usually helped her clear her head. The next day, on June 1st, 29-year-old Alicia posted again on Facebook that she was going fishing. She also posted many Snapchats that day leading up to her arrival at the Missouri River at Myron Grove. Shortly before 1 p.m., she sent a message saying that she was unable to find her tackle box, and so she was starting over. 15 minutes later at 1:06 p.m., she stopped at the Walmart in Vermilion to buy a fishing license. At 1:19, she sent a text about the old man who issued her the license saying that he had said he hoped she caught a big one. She Snapchatted a photo of the dock as she arrived at Myron Grove at 1:30 p.m. 15 minutes later, she apparently saw two people having sex in a car, saying in a text to a friend, "Apparently it's a nice day to get it on in the car midday too." Less than 2 hours later, at 3:30 p.m., her body was found in the water next to the dock by a game, fish, and parks officer. Her car keys were found on her front seat with the window down, and her fishing pole was missing and has never been found. Around 5:20 p.m. that day, she was reported missing by family and friends. Sadly, her family was notified of her death at 10:30 p.m. that night. Her cause of death was drowning, but she also had blunt force trauma and wounds to her neck. While law enforcement contends that Alicia may have seen something that day that she shouldn't have, those close to her have a hard time believing it was a random act. However, investigators say that Tony has an alibi as he was in Pierre at the time of her death. The state worker who found her body in a nearby residence saw a vehicle leaving the area, but only had a vague description of it being a dark car. Investigators put up surveillance cameras at the scene after the murder in hopes of someone returning, but that never happened. A year later, her purse was located on a sandbar with her cash and other items inside, but her cell phone was missing. Investigators have not released her autopsy results to her family, saying it may contain information only the killer would know. The manner in which she was killed also holds clues that could eventually break the case. Alicia's loved ones continue to search for justice and closure, but as of today, this case remains unsolved. Tamara Hi, known as Tammy, was born on April 13, 1973 to Steve and Nancy and lived in Yankton, South Dakota, where she also graduated high school. On September 18, 1992, 19-year-old Tammy and her boyfriend Eric were last seen at a homecoming party in Yankton at a farmhouse at 897th Road about 11:15 p.m. Around that time, several people at the party claimed that they heard yelling coming from the area of Eric's car, but no one checked it out. The next day, when Tammy didn't show up, her family reported her missing. Her body was found 5 days later in a ravine not far from the farmhouse where the party was held. She was found by a golfer searching for golf balls just across the South Dakota border into Nebraska near a golf course. The autopsy showed she had died from hyperflexion of her neck. Authorities believe the injury to be a result of foul play and said at the time evidence showed she had been in the trunk of a car and dumped in that ravine. Her estimated time of death was listed between 12:35 and 1 a.m., over an hour from the time she was last seen at the party. The autopsy also showed that due to the pooling of blood in her body, she would have been dumped in the ravine approximately 30 minutes after her death. She had multiple defense wounds and a tear in her intestinal wall, consistent with blunt force trauma. She had abrasions on her back, consistent with being dragged across asphalt. Yellow paint from the road was also found on her body. Her clothing was covered in urine from 2 different people. One urine sample was matched to Eric. Another partygoer claimed that, as a joke, He urinated in Eric's car through an open window at 11:35. Eric told police that they left the party at 10:45 and went to his parents' house. He claimed that she took off walking to her aunt's home between 12:30 and 1 a.m. and that was the last time he saw her. Several people that traveled on that road during that time period denied seeing Tammy walking. The partygoer that urinated in Eric's car stated that he saw Eric cleaning his car the next day and he assumed he was cleaning it because he had urinated in it. When Eric was asked by police about washing his car, he did not mention anything about urine. A friend of Eric stated that on the night of the party, Eric came to the restaurant that his father owned and calmly stated that, "Think I killed a girl," in the midst of their conversation. Investigators would find one of Tammy's hairs in the trunk of Eric's car, and fibers were found on her clothing that matched his floor mats. Plastic was also found on her clothing that matched plastic found in his trunk. He claimed that days before, they shared a beach towel that was in his trunk, and that is why the hair, plastic, and fibers were found. Just days before the statute of limitations would expire in 1995, police arrested Eric for her murder. He was tried on third-degree manslaughter in 1996 but was acquitted. Since the crime took place near the Knox and Cedar County line in Nebraska, the trial was set in Nebraska instead of South Dakota. The jury sent a question to the judge during their hours of deliberation about whether the crime had to take place in Cedar County, Nebraska, for Eric to be found guilty. The judge answered yes, and since prosecutors couldn't tell the jury where the alleged altercation between Eric and Tammy had taken place, he was acquitted. Judge Maurice Redmond, who presided over the trial, was rated the worst judge in Nebraska in 2004 by the State Bar Association, stating that he sometimes showed partiality in the courtroom. After his trial, Eric moved to Minnesota and got married. His wife stated that when she later found out about the trial via Facebook that she confronted him and he allegedly admitted to killing Tammy. His wife then divorced him. Sadly, Tammy's gravesite has been vandalized many times and her killer has not been brought to justice. As of today, this case remains unsolved. Serenity June Dennard was born May 12, 2009. Sadly, according to her parents, Serenity suffered trauma as a result of her early childhood experiences, which is what most likely caused her to develop multiple psychological and mental health disorders. As a result of her conditions, she suffered from behavioral problems, including running away and threats of self-harm. When she was just a toddler, she was removed from her biological parents' care and then stayed in about a dozen foster homes, and both of her birth parents ended up in prison. In October 2014, she was adopted by foster parents that had cared for her for several months and lived in Sturgis, South Dakota. Several months later, her adoptive parents would divorce and she would live primarily with her adoptive father. After being placed in a psychiatric center and receiving years of outpatient therapy which failed to help, her father and stepmother felt that it was no longer safe for the 9-year-old to remain at home. In July 2018, they sent her to live at the Black Hills Children's Home in a remote, wooded area outside of Rapid City, South Dakota. The school provided intensive inpatient therapy and schooling for children aged 4 to 14 years old. She was expected to stay there for about 14 months. Her adoptive parents would make continuous visits to the school several times a month to see her, and she was only allowed to call them twice a week. She had a few incidents while at the school, including hiding from the staff on multiple occasions, and once she ran away while playing outside, but the staff was able to catch her. On February 3, 2019, 2 staff members were watching over some children playing in the gymnasium when all of a sudden a child would run out of one of the doors and one of the staff members would chase after her. As this happened, Serenity took the opportunity and ran out as well. However, the remaining staff member couldn't chase her because it would have left multiple other children unattended. Serenity would run out of the gym as another child was being dropped off by her grandmother. They saw her run out and began northbound on South Rockerville Road. She was not wearing a coat and the temperature that day was around 0. The grandmother instructed her granddaughter to stay in the car and watch where the little girl went as she went inside and told a staff member about the incident. The grandmother then went back to her car, at which point her granddaughter had lost sight of the child. They began driving to look for her, but she was never seen again. After Serenity disappeared, the staff announced on their radio about the incident, but almost all of the staff were on different channels. They didn't call 911 until the supervisor arrived over an hour and a half later. Instead, they searched the area for her themselves. The children's home has been under much public scrutiny after the disappearance. Reports state that the facility lacked a sufficient emergency preparedness plan and failed to conduct training or drills for runaways. Numerous extensive searches of the area, including police, volunteers, and search dogs, have turned up no sign of her. In early 2020, a man working at the Bass Pro Shop in Las Vegas was alarmed when he saw a young girl with a much older man kissing and holding hands. The man begins filming the two and even followed them out in the parking lot as the man held onto the young girl as if he were trying to keep her from running away. The man quickly notified the police and wrote down the license plate of the van they were seen getting into. Upon investigation, the police stated that the man provided passports for him and the girl and stated that she was 18 years old and they had recently married in South Africa. The investigators felt sure that the girl was not Serenity and stated that it was a cultural misunderstanding. The girl pictured on the right is Serenity and very much resembles the girl on the left. I don't normally give my opinion, but the girl with the older man does not look 18. However, at the time the picture and video were taken, Serenity would have been almost 11. Let me know in the comments if you think the girl is closer to 18 years old or closer to 11. If the girl is not Serenity, I still find it alarming, especially the way he was holding her arms as they walked toward the van. Her family does not believe it is her, and her father believes she succumbed to the elements the day she disappeared. He believes that she probably watched people searching for her from a distance, and as they got closer, she went deeper into the wilderness and became lost. The search was reclassified from a rescue to a recovery effort after several days, as Serenity could not have survived in the extremely cold temperatures. The sheriff's office suspended the search for her in March of 2021. As of today, she has not been located and her case remains unsolved. Arnold Archambault and Ruby Bruiller lived on the Yankton Sioux Indian Reservation in South Dakota and began dating in high school. The couple had a baby girl named Erica in 1991 and were living in Lake Andes, South Dakota. On December 11, 1992, the couple took Ruby's 17-year-old cousin Tracy out for a night of partying and drinks. Shortly before 6 a.m. on December 12th, they arrived at Tracy's home where they had left the baby with Tracy's father. However, he asked them to come back later since they had been drinking. Just a few minutes later, when they were stopped at a stop sign at the intersection on the edge of the Yankton Sioux Indian Reservation in Lake Andes, Arnold apparently gassed it and spun out. He would lose control of the car and land upside down in a nearby frozen ditch. When Tracy regained consciousness, Ruby was the only other one in the car and she was hitting up against the inside and crying and yelling, "Oh my God." Strangely, one of the car's doors opened just enough for Ruby to slide out of the car, but it fell closed when it was Tracy's turn. She waited for them to open the door again, but they never did. When police arrived, Tracy was rescued from the car, but there was no signs of Arnold or Ruby. Despite the ice underneath the car being entirely frozen solid, the police still feared that they may have wandered off only to fall through the ice and drown at another location. Officers scoured the area looking for any signs of them but were unsuccessful. They also speculated that Arnold might have run off on purpose to prevent being arrested for drunk driving. 3 weeks later, on New Year's Eve, a witness claimed that she had seen Arnold accompanied by 3 other people in a vehicle. This witness was given a polygraph test and passed. The 3 other people she identified were also allegedly given polygraph tests, but they all failed. Over the next 3 months, Deputy Youngstrom continued to scour the area looking for the couple. In early March, as the ice began to thaw, a passing motorist saw a body floating in a ditch just 75 feet away from the site of the accident. The body was that of Ruby. She was wearing the same clothes as she had been wearing when she disappeared, and they were completely intact. Her shoes and glasses were missing, and her body was severely decomposed. Police decided to pump the ditch, and by noon the next day, they found Arnold. He was submerged in the water roughly 15 feet away from where Ruby had been found. Oddly, his body was in almost perfect condition, and he didn't seem to have been frozen to the ground like one would expect. Their bodies were found in different stages of decomposition. despite both of them having been allegedly underwater for 3 months. It was expected that they would have decomposed at the same rate. The bodies were immediately autopsied, but it was impossible to estimate a time of death. The coroner announced that they had found that the 2 victims had died of exposure, but Deputy Youngstrom was skeptical of this. He refused to believe that they had been in the ditch the entire time. He had also walked along that same ditch several times during those 3 months, and so had many others, but they never saw the couple. Also, when they were finally found, a tuft of hair was found alongside the nearby road, and it was determined by forensic analysis to belong to Ruby. He suggested that the couple had been abducted, and when they were brought back to the ditch, that's when a piece of Ruby's hair fell off. Rumors have circulated that the couple were held captive in a cabin or farmhouse north of the lake by a man from Alabama living in the area with a long criminal history. Many speculate that when the pair was brought back to the scene, the killer unknowingly stepped on Ruby's hair, pulling it from her head and leaving it on the road where it would later be found. Also, a set of keys were found in Arnold's pocket when he was dragged up from the ditch, as well as what appeared to be 2 house keys. Deputies were unable to find the vehicle or the house to which the keys belong. Authorities have been unable to locate 2 men driving a dark Blazer-style vehicle who were seen near the ditch just a few hours before the bodies were discovered. Ruby's father stated they had to die someplace else. Somebody had to come and put them back in there again to make it look like that's where they died. The FBI closed this case in 1999 as they found no evidence of foul play and felt that Arnold and Ruby died accidentally. However, some officers involved in this case, along with Arnold and Ruby's families, still believe that foul play was involved. As of today, this case remains unsolved. The case of Penny McAllister. Penny McAllister, the eldest daughter of Desmond, a teacher and soldier, grew up in Germany, immersed in the arts, music, theater, and school drama. She was a bright, charming young woman. At 16, Penny met Duncan McAllister in the officers' mess bar in Germany. Born in 1961, Duncan had attended UK boarding school and, like his father, joined the army, training in signals. He'd been engaged to a UK woman, but ended it before being posted to Germany, where he met Penny. Dazzled by Penny's beauty, Duncan was rude at first, but later adored her. A few months on, he plucked up the nerve to visit, and they became an item. They fell fast, spending all the time they could together. In '83, Duncan was reassigned to the UK, and before departing, he asked Penny to marry him. They wed the next year when she was 18 and he was 23. Couple relocated to Wiltshire, with Duncan enrolling at the Royal Military College, while Penny pursued her studies. Their newlywed years were blissful, marked by shared adventures, travel, and a mutual passion for diving learned on vacation. Eventually, Duncan received a posting to Northern Ireland at the height of the Troubles. Penny accompanied him, which was an unusual step, as most British Army wives stayed in the UK due to the dangerous and volatile situation. They settled in County Armagh, the smallest county in Northern Ireland, home to Loughney, the largest freshwater lake in the UK and Ireland. In February 1990, Duncan and Penny decided to set up an army diving club to expand their social circle. Duncan was the more confident diver, providing instruction, while Penny handled the administrative work. One of the members who joined to learn diving was a young woman named Susan Christie, a petite soldier, and member of the Ulster Defence Regiment UDR. Susan was the daughter of a non-commissioned officer in the UDR, and it was said that she had her father wrapped around her little finger. She was very driven and planned to follow in her father's footsteps, joining the UDR just before her 21st birthday. She was initially part-time but excelled as she was a perfectionist, which suited army life. She was an attention seeker who flirted skillfully to captivate men, but never went too far. Yet, she'd pout and act like a brat if denied that spotlight. This behavior only intensified when she joined the diving team. Susan flirted with Duncan, a married man, and they began a physical affair. Though Duncan claimed it was just a fling, and he loved his wife Penny, their relationship escalated, with Duncan taking Susan's virginity and them meeting for sex in secret. Penny suspected Susan and Duncan's behavior, though she lacked proof. Trusting her intuition, She watched them closely, hoping the situation would resolve itself. However, Penny's optimism would prove misguided. But Susan's behavior around Duncan, particularly in the diving circle, became unpredictable. Susan was jealous of Penny, as she treated her horribly. She was rude and would ignore Penny, even if she was to even just say hello. It wasn't enough for Susan to have Duncan in the palm of her hand. She would also try and make Duncan jealous if they all went to the pub after a dive and she wasn't sitting next to him. She would flirt with the other soldiers around them. Duncan would describe it as leading them on, and if any of them tried for a kiss or anything more, Susan would run back to him crying, saying she was being harassed. Susan, rightly so, began to get a reputation for throwing accusations around. She also began to fake illness when she wasn't getting the attention she wanted, and was treated in hospital a few times when there was nothing wrong with her. In September 1990, a serious incident occurred. Duncan and Susan dived with the club near the wrecked SS Triple, which had sunk in 1917 off County Antrim after hitting a mine. It was a deeper dive than usual. The wreck lay 30 meters down. Duncan, the cautious leader, had all stopped mid-ascend for 2 minutes to avoid decompression sickness. When they surfaced, he warned that anyone feeling unwell should contact him or a supervisor. Everyone, including Susan, said they were fine. The next morning, Duncan received a call that Susan was, to no one's surprise, unwell. She had joint pains, a symptom of the bends, so Duncan took her to a specialist. Though she could walk to the car and into the clinic, when left in the waiting room she dramatically collapsed and needed a nurse's attention. The doctor confirmed her symptoms matched surfacing too quickly, but found it curious that Duncan, her diving partner, showed no signs. Despite 2 compression chamber runs, Susan continued feeling unwell concerning the doctor the week before during a training course, and perhaps the pain she was experiencing was from that. Both the doctor and Duncan were furious that their time and energy had been wasted on what was probably a false alarm. But they weren't the only ones. Once pissed off, Penny had been left at home for hours while her husband was attending to the woman she suspected he was having an affair with. Penny was so fed up that she actually called her mother. She didn't tell her mother in so many words what was going on, but her mother would understand how hard it was to live on an army base as she had done it with her own husband, and she would be clever enough to read between the lines. Next to a woman's intuition, a mother's intuition is like having a superpower. This was the only second time Penny had opened up about her worries. Last summer, she went to Germany to see a friend and told them about her concerns over Duncan and Susan. She also confided the loss of her pregnancy but kept it from Duncan due to their relationship troubles. That weekend, Duncan had Susan over while Penny visited her friend in Germany, their first time being together overnight. Susan soon professed her love for Duncan, but he refused to return the sentiment. He brushed her off, confessing he felt unable to express his love due to his loyalty to his wife. He had no issue betraying his wife by getting intimate with Susan, but drawing the line at declaring his love, as that would be too much of a betrayal. The diving club arranged a trip to Ascension Island in October 1990, and at first there was a problem with Penny's flight, which elated Susan, but then Duncan intervened, getting Penny on a flight. This infuriated Susan, who was very hostile towards Penny, who was just trying to ensure a smooth trip. Penny organized the equipment and cooked for everyone, but Susan, in one of her moods, refused to eat Penny's food or help her. Duncan soon realized that Susan wasn't just in love with him, but obsessed. He was stuck dividing his time between the two women. Even though he was a knight with Susan, he still managed to slip away with her a few times throughout the trip. Duncan pulled Susan on her behavior towards Penny, and while he was concerned for Penny over Susan's behavior, he was even more concerned when they actually seemed to be getting on. They would sit together, have long conversations, and get on towards the end of the trip. After the trip, Duncan decided he would have to end the affair with Susan. It was clear by this stage that Susan was dangerous, and if she got close to Penny, she could tell her of the affair, and his marriage would be over, and it also put a risk to his career. Duncan told Susan the affair was over, but she was having none of it. She cried and then totally ignored the fact that it was over. On the 2nd of 1990, Susan told Duncan she thought she was pregnant. Upset, he panicked, couldn't understand how this happened. Susan said she was sick on their Ascension Island trip, but didn't say anything, not wanting to be stopped from diving. When discussing options, Duncan made his views clear, but said it was Susan's decision and he'd support her. The first option was termination. She could have the baby, but he'd be uninvolved financially. Or she could have the baby, name him as the father, but he'd lose his job. Termination was the only option for Susan. She didn't want to raise the baby alone, and she wanted to keep her career. A while later, Susan told Duncan she was pregnant. The doctor said it'd be best to wait before arranging an abortion. Abortion was illegal up to 2020, so she'd have had to travel. A month later, Susan announced she'd lost the baby. Convenient, as she never went to the hospital or took time off work. Duncan stayed in touch that week, after Susan lost the baby, trying to console her over the loss. However, Susan later contacted Duncan after meeting up with Penny for lunch. She was very angry with Duncan. She had told Penny about the miscarriage and claimed that she too had lost a baby, fully aware of what Susan was going through. Susan was furious and called Duncan to find out why he had not told her this himself. Of course, he could not have, as Penny had not informed him, and he had not even known she was pregnant. He was devastated that Penny had not confided in him, and he also realized that he could not ask Penny about it. Susan had to go to the UK for a work course in 1991. This helped end her affair with Duncan, as he was also posted to Germany. But they still continued seeing each other, much to Penny's annoyance, until Susan made a scene trying to get Duncan to go out with her. The weekend before Susan was to go to the UK, Penny went to Dublin with some army wives. Duncan and Susan would spend that same weekend together, and it would be the last time they would have together, so they made the most of it. They went diving together, went for walks, and, of course, had a bit of housework. Susan was upset that things were finally coming to an end, but told Duncan she was happy they'd remain friends. However, people that gullible think they can stay friends after an affair. After the weekend was over and Penny returned home, Duncan was surprised to receive a call from Susan. He thought that their weekend together clearly signaled that they were over. Obviously, Duncan didn't understand the staying friends bit was Susan's way of holding on. She continued to call Duncan at work and even made plans to meet Penny for a walk and lunch before she left for the UK on Tuesday, the 26th of March, 1991. Duncan received a call from Susan. She asked what could have happened if he wasn't married. This was a risky question, with a perilous answer that could lead to dire consequences. Duncan said it was pointless to consider as things are as they are. He noted they'd face other challenges as she's a soldier and he's an officer, and their relationship was prohibited in the army, even if she was commissioned, as she was stationed in Northern Ireland while he couldn't be there long term. Susan agreed and was upset by the truths he shared before ending the call. The following day, Wednesday, March 27th, Penny dropped Duncan to work and headed into town, as she had to drop some stuff off at the army-run shop, and then later go to meet Susan for their walk with the dogs and lunch out. This morning will be the last time Duncan would see his beautiful wife alive. Penny also had to prepare for a visit from her parents, and was busy at home getting things ready. Penny told Duncan she was not looking forward to her lunch days with Susan, as she had rescheduled twice already, and she was really too busy that day to meet with her, but she decided to go anyway. Later that morning, Duncan received a call from Susan asking if he knew where Penny was. She tried ringing the house, but no one answered. She couldn't remember if they were supposed to meet at 11 a.m. or 11:30 a.m. Duncan, exasperated by the call, told Susan to go to the meeting place at 11 and wait there for Penny, then ended the call. Duncan headed out of the office that afternoon, known for a fitness test which was a 3-mile run. As he returned to the office, he met with his commanding officer, who was not looking too pleased. Duncan thought he was coming to tell him that he was not going to be going to Germany, but instead he had graver news. He sat Duncan down and told him that Penny was dead. At first, Duncan could not take in the information. His commanding officer continued to tell him about the circumstances of Penny's death. It became more real. Penny was out for a walk in John Cara Forest and collapsed with her dogs and was attacked. He was told that there was another woman with her and she was injured and brought to the hospital. Duncan knew straight away who this woman was, but that didn't concern him straight away. He knew Penny's parents were to arrive in a few hours, and he would have to break this devastating news to them, and also had the ordeal of telling his own parents. The police secured the area where Penny's body was found, and they took witness statements from a family who had been having a picnic nearby. When Susan emerged from the forest, crying, screaming, and bloodied, she was unable to stand properly, and her hands were covered in blood. Her clothes were ripped, and she had scratches on her face and a stab wound to her torso. The woman of the family went to help Susan, and her husband went to call the police. Susan meanwhile begged for someone to find Penny. After she explained that they were both attacked by a man, and she had managed to escape, but that Penny was still in the forest, the police arrived and went into the forest. A local doctor treated Susan for her injuries. They followed the trail and soon found Penny lying on the forest floor, covered in blood, and her throat had been cut. This is where she bled out and died. Susan was brought to the hospital and treated for her scratches and stab wound, then sent home. That night, Duncan rang her to see how she was and to ask her what happened. All she kept saying was sorry, and that she tried to help but couldn't. He agreed to go see her after seeing Penny. Susan offered to go with him and was very insistent, but Duncan said it was something he had to do on his own. The following day, he visited Susan at her home, and she again tearfully kept apologizing to him for not saving Penny. Duncan, as usual, believed since crocodile tears and told her it wasn't her fault. Susan told him what happened. Penny and Susan met up as planned. They went for a walk in the forest on a lovely day. Susan stopped to tie her shoelaces, while Penny went ahead with the dogs. Penny's dog started barking furiously, and Susan saw a man standing over Penny on the ground. Penny was bleeding and the man had a knife. The man then attacked Susan, pulling her, knocking her down and trying to take her clothes. Susan kneed him and then went to Penny's aid. Susan couldn't stop Penny's bleeding, and the man had fled the scene, so she ran to the car park. The attacker was of average height, had brown hair, blue eyes, and was wearing a green jacket, blue jeans, and white sneakers. Police visited Susan's house and requested her to go to the forest where she and Penny were attacked. The police suspected Susan was withholding information, and they were right. Susan and Duncan did not disclose their affair to the police, as they agreed it was irrelevant to Penny's case. They agreed to keep quiet about the affair if the police found out. The police questioned Susan extensively at the station throughout the day. She complained that the officer was not courteous, but Duncan said that's how they gather evidence. Susan felt she was mistreated and that the police were against her. She told Duncan they would speak to a friend who knew about their affair, which worried him. Duncan tells Susan that the police are searching for a white car and a description of the perpetrator. This is a relief for Susan since she is not the only one who saw the man she described. Overnight, Duncan thought he should approach the police and tell them about the affair. He also felt it would save time, and they would focus solely on finding who killed Penny. Duncan wasted no time in contacting the police, providing them with a comprehensive account. The authorities had little need for further questioning, merely inquiring about his familiarity with Drumcara Forest and Susan's recent visit. Duncan denied knowledge of the former, but acknowledged the latter, requesting discretion regarding the Army's involvement, which the police stated was not feasible. He was instructed to return to Northern Ireland following Penny's funeral in England. When he arrived in England, his father picked him up at the airport and he told him about the affair on the eve of Penny's funeral. He knew that Susan had been arrested for Penny's murder. Now he had to tell Penny's family about the affair. He called Penny's parents and told them everything. They were kind during the funeral the next day, even letting Duncan sit next to them. There are better people out there than some, and I see that with the families of victims, especially the parents. Meanwhile, Susan was being questioned and she had stuck to her story throughout. The police told her that Duncan had confessed to their affair and Susan began to deflect and change her story. Suddenly she had memory loss and could no longer remember what happened that day in the forest. The police were watching Susan's behavior throughout and noticed that she seemed to like the attention she was getting during the interviews. She ate everything that was put in front of her. She tried to befriend the female officer that was assigned to the case. This was not the typical behavior of someone who had witnessed the brutal murder of their friend and then implicated in us. When questioned, Duncan was asked about his relationship with Susan and whether he and Penny had an open marriage. Police also asked if Penny didn't help Susan in an accident during a dive, and if Duncan forced Susan to terminate a pregnancy. Susan claimed that Penny had provoked her that day, causing her distress and a blackout, after which Penny was found dead. Police believed that Susan was withholding the full truth, possibly to cover for Duncan. They also questioned why Duncan had conspired with Susan to cover up the affair unless he had something to do it. Why had he spent 2 days with this supposed ex-lover following the news of his wife's death? Duncan flatly denied everything, and his statement was prepared and he was released. Susan was kept in custody where she quickly adjusted to prison life. Her father visited her and so did friends, but she never admitted to anyone what she did on June 1, 1992. Susan appeared at Downpatrick Court and pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. The Crown's opening statement was damning. They said Susan had lured her lover's wife to a secluded spot and then brutally murdered her. It was a case of premeditated murder. Then she tried to cover up the murder by inventing an attacker and injuring herself. Forensic scientist Joseph Corr testified he visited the crime scene, believed Penny was attacked from behind, grabbed by coat and hair on left side, with one earring pulled off. Penny's neck was slashed, causing immediate unconsciousness. Police found a recently sharpened boning knife 260 yards away, which Corr believed was the murder weapon. Susan's blue jacket had Penny's blood type, but not Susan's. The doctor that attended Susan at the scene that day was next to take the stand. He described Susan curled up on the floor of the car park near the forest. He patched up the small wound on her leg and the scratches across her stomach. Her underwear was slightly ripped and blood-stained, and when Silverton removed her gloves that she was wearing on the rather mild day, which didn't warrant the need for gloves, her hands were covered in blood. But there were no injuries when he did a follow-up on Susan a few days later. He summarized that her injuries were self-inflicted. The state pathologist then took to the stand and he described the horrific injuries to Penny and agreed with the forensic scientist that Penny would have lost consciousness straight away and would have been dead within a few minutes. As the horrific injuries were being described, Susan could be heard sobbing. A doctor was called, and it was determined that Susan was not medically fit to continue the trial. When the trial resumed, Duncan took the witness stand and had to recount all the details of his affair with Susan. The defense exploited Duncan's demeanor, accusing him of being cold and indifferent towards Susan, and ignoring the emotional toll the affair had on her, in order to continue it to satisfy his own sexual needs. He acted callously, telling her he loved her, but in a different way than he loved his wife. As Duncan was being cross-examined by the defense, Susan sat there weeping. Next time, Susan testified for 3 days. She talked about her relationship with Duncan, hoping that he would leave his wife for her, though that wasn't her initial intention. She admitted that she liked being the center of attention, but denied faking illness or injury to maintain that role. She also denied lying about her pregnancy and miscarriage, and that Duncan had told her she was right to want to have an abortion. Susan grew close to Penny on Ascension Island as fellow divers. Susan admitted to being jealous of Penny, who sometimes felt the same. Penny confronted Duncan about their affair, but never mentioned it to Susan. I doubt this. If Penny hadn't told Duncan about her miscarriage, she didn't confront him about the affair. Penny was classy and knew Duncan would never leave her for someone like Susan. On the day of the murder, Susan claimed she felt unwell and tried canceling the meet with Penny, who had already left. They met, drove to the forest, and Susan couldn't recall the attack, claiming memory loss. She denied buying and sharpening the knife, but later admitted lying to the police, realizing she must have been the attacker. A psychiatrist assessed Susan, concluding she had depression and stress reaction at the time. Another psychiatrist found her reaction normal with only mild depression, not a mental illness, and that she fabricated memory loss. The trial took a break for the weekend, and when it resumed the following Monday, Lord Justice Kelly provided his instructions and summary to the jury. He asked them, Is it more likely than not that Susan Christie was suffering from mental abnormalities when she planned, premeditated, and executed her plan to kill Penny? That is the sole focus of this case. After 4 hours of deliberation and being informed that a majority verdict would be accepted, the 8 men and 4 women of the jury reached their verdict. She was found guilty of manslaughter and cleared of the murder of Penny. Before pronouncing sentence, Lord Justice Kelly explained to the court the factors that would influence his decision. He acknowledged the gravity of the offense and the devastating impact of Penny's death on her loved ones. However, he also had to consider the personal circumstances that drove Susan to commit the crime. He pointed out that Susan was a young woman with no prior criminal history and no experience of physical relationships. The judge stressed that her affair with Duncan had triggered the events that led to Penny's death, and he was confident that Susan was unlikely to repeat such a heinous act. In the end, the judge sentenced Susan to a mere 5 years in prison for the heinous crime of slitting Penny's throat. It's shocking that such a lenient sentence was handed down. Upon hearing the verdict, Penny's mother was overcome with grief, crying out and shaking with emotion. In contrast, Susan showed no immediate reaction to the news. The public was outraged by the leniency of the sentence, and rightly so. Regardless of the circumstances that led Susan to kill Penny, it's clear that Penny was the true victim. The judge's consideration of Susan's age was irrelevant in this case. After all, Penny was only 24 years old when her life was brutally cut short. Where was the judge's consideration for her youth? This injustice is infuriating. The Attorney General's office referred the case to the Court of Appeal to review Susan's sentence. In 1994, a 3-judge panel examined the case and ruled that Susan didn't have depression, as she was never treated for it and didn't miss work. They found she planned the killing and tried to cover it up. Her sentence was increased to 9 years. Susan was released from prison in October 1995 after serving just short of 5 years, including time served on remand. While preparing for release, she worked outside the prison. One of her colleagues described her as a man-hungry schemer, and a businessman that had worked with her since she fully left prison described her as the most manipulative person you were ever likely to meet. I wouldn't trust her as far as I could throw her. Duncan never visited her in prison, and she was dishonorably discharged from the army. It is said that she changed her name and disappeared. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.